colleagues, I want to bring this meeting to order. And pursuant to Standing Orders 110 and 111, ordering council appointments of the Honourable Stéphane Dion to the position of ambassador and advisor to, no longer the advisor, and this is referred to the committee on Friday, February 24, 2017. Now, we're going to move this along at a fairly good clip. We'll let the Honourable Stéphane Dion, new ambassador to Germany, make some opening comments, and then we'll get right into questions. As you know, there's a vote this morning. As usual, it will interrupt our proceedings. So we'll try and manage the clock as best we can. So I want to, first of all, introduce our witness and the ambassadors, Mr. Dion, and his colleague, Alexandra Bugalitsky. And she is the Assistant Deputy Minister, Europe, Middle East, and Maghreb, right? So she'll be here to answer some of the technical questions if Mr. Dion doesn't know everything. We think he does, so that won't be a problem for Alexandra this morning. So I'm going to turn the floor over to the Honourable Stéphane Dion and for opening comments, and then we'll go into the usual process of Q&A. So, Mr. Dion, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, members of Parliament, I'd like to thank you, all of you, as well as all the members of the committee, for having invited me this morning. As you said, Mr. Chairman, I am with Ms. Alex Bugalitsky, who is Deputy Minister for Europe, Northern Africa, and the Middle East. All will agree that our relationship with Europe will be particularly crucial for the years to come. And this not only because of the opportunities that Europe offers, but because of the challenges it faces, just as we face challenges, and we will all deal best with these challenges if we work together. First of all, the opportunities.
The world's second largest market with over 500 million consumers and a GDP of $21 trillion. We are speaking about the world's largest importer of aerospace products, fish and seafood, oil and gas products, telecommunications, computer and information services, the world's second largest importer of automotive goods, and Canada has less than 1% of that business today, the second largest importer of medical devices and pharmaceutical products, and our second largest customer of metals and minerals. We need to make sure that the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement is a success, not just a signed agreement. It must be a reality on the ground that will provide jobs for our workers and investments for our economy. Today, only 26% of EU tariff lines on Canadian goods are duty-free. With CETA, 98% of EU tariff lines will be duty-free for Canadian goods. For example, after tariffs as high as 10% are cut, exporters of Canadian forestry products will have an opportunity to increase their EU market share. CETA will open new agriculture and agri-food market opportunities for Canadian exporters, with almost 94% of EU agriculture tariffs becoming duty-free. The EU annual infrastructure outlays are estimated at $400 billion, larger than that of the United States. The EU has earmarked hundreds of billions of euros for transportation, energy, and broadband projects by 2020. CETA is for us a golden opportunity to succeed in this huge market. But CETA is more than a welcome lever for our economic growth. It is also the opportunity to show our populations and the world that trade and societal progress may go hand in hand. There is no need to choose between trade and progress. It is the way to pull together our ability to share the best practices for social justice, environmental sustainability, labor rights, food safety, and so on. Ceci m'amène à passer des opportunités.
So now I'd like to deal with challenges. Recently, Donald Tusk, the president of the European Community, said, and I quote him, "The rise of anti-EU sentiment, nationalist and xenophobic sentiments within the European Union, as well as a lack of faith in political integration, populist arguments, and a questioning of basic values of liberal democracy," end of quote. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe and Canada are facing challenges which know no borders and which we will deal with best together. Our demographic weight is falling, our population is aging, and our productivity and efficacy must increase. Our population is diversifying, becoming more heterogeneous. So let us make our diversity a strength. Gender equality is not yet entirely acquired. The globalization of markets has left by the wayside entire sections of labor. Our planet can no longer bear the pillage it's been experiencing. So together, let's find the way towards sustainable development. Our great common neighbor, Russia, is of concern. So we also have to have common defense and entering resolutely into necessary dialogue. We also have to cooperate in order to counter our common terrorist threat. Now, what will help us in meeting these challenges, both for Europeans and Canadians, is not only CETA, but also the fact that Europeans and Canadians are now officially partners and strategic partners.
CETA, we have also just concluded a strategic partnership agreement. This agreement encompasses key parts of our bilateral and multilateral cooperation, such as peace and security, clean energy and climate change, the promotion of human rights, sustainable development, science and innovation. As we see, the relationship between Europe and Canada are truly at a crucial time. To maximize our chances of success, the Prime Minister is convinced that a new resource is needed, a senior diplomat to Europe, playing an overarching role in advancing Canada's interest throughout Europe, ensuring coherence across the activities of Canadian diplomatic missions, and providing guidance to the Prime Minister. The Canadian presence in Europe is presently in 32 countries through 36 bilateral missions, in addition to 8 multilateral missions. The Prime Minister wants a senior diplomat to help him, the government, the Foreign Affairs Minister, and all our ambassadors and missions to pull together Canada's pan-European efforts. The Prime Minister wants that this diplomat be posted in one of the key European countries and from there ensure a more cohesive diplomacy aimed at advancing our shared interest with the whole of Europe. Parmi ces pays européens clés,
among the key European countries, Germany is a great choice to deal with the economy because it is the major economic power in Europe with a GDP of more than $4 trillion, representing 20% of the GDP of Europe.
Germany cooperates with Canada across a range of issue areas such as transnational relations, Russia-Ukraine, counterterrorism, the global fight against Daesh, and migration. As the ambassador to Germany, I will be working extremely hard, supported by our strong and professional mission, to strengthen this key economic and political relationship, key not only for our goals in Europe, but in fact across the globe. Le Premier ministre m'a demandé d'être.
The Prime Minister asked me to be this senior diplomat, ambassador to Germany, and also his special envoy to the European Union and to Europe. I accepted this responsibility. I have been preparing myself actively over the past weeks. I will be leaving for Europe shortly, and I will be happy to undertake tasks for the government, the Prime Minister in my country. I know that what is at stake is significant not only for Europe, but for Canada.
To welcome my appointment, the presidents for the European Council and for the European Commission, Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker, said that this appointment, and I quote, affords us the chance to take those relations to a new level and to champion our shared values of freedom, human rights, and democracy, as well as our shared dedication to the market economy, so as to drive forward our common interest in a period of unprecedented challenges. End of quote. I will do everything I can to rise to these expectations. I am eager to take up my responsibilities, and I know that in this journey, I will always benefit from the advice and hard work of this committee. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Dankeschön.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador, and that was good opening comments. And I'm going to go, as I said, quickly to the Q&As to keep us on time, so I'll go to Mr. Kent, please.
Thank you, Chair, et merci, Ambassadeur désigné, pour votre.
And thank you, Ambassador Designate, for being here today.
Ambassadorial representation to smaller countries from a primary diplomatic post. But who, can you please tell us who came up with the bizarre concept of a Canadian ambassador representing two major governments? Was it your condition to the Prime Minister's appointment after the cabinet shuffle? Was it the Prime Minister's condition?
I never made any condition to a Prime Minister. You don't ask anything to a Prime Minister. You listen what he wants you to do, and
Sometimes
you
you
look at
negotiate.
it. I never did it.
Okay.
Never. I never asked for anything in politics.
So who came up with the concept?
The Prime Minister told me that, and he said that publicly, the same thing publicly than to me, that under the new circumstances in which we are and where Europe is, he felt the need to strengthen our ability to address these challenges through a new diplomatic resource, and he asked me to be that. So that's really the way it has been communicated to Canadians and to me, the same way.
Now, your appointment to both the EU and Germany provoked outspoken and widespread criticism from retired Canadian diplomats, and I am well aware of some seething frustration within global affairs by those in the department today, and we've experienced in our meetings with the EU delegation here in Ottawa an awful lot of head shaking trying to understand exactly what this concept was meant to deliver in terms of a message. And it turns out in the end, unfortunately for you, that the critics of this double appointment were proven correct. For those of us that have been around a while, and I haven't been around as long as some on this committee, it was a real head shaker that anyone might have made this bizarre appointment, and that no one with experience didn't raise concerns before it was made. Your thoughts?
I'm aware that discussions happen, some positive, other a different view as the one you express. I'm accustomed to that since I am in the public service. I've always been around some very lively discussions about me and what I'm doing for my country. I'm convinced that what the Prime Minister is proposing may be new, but is needed, and I will do everything to make him right and to work closely with you and with this committee to be sure that this will be an addition to our ability to address with Europe the challenges I just described in my presentation. But you're right that it's a new way to address new challenges.
Now, aside from your rejection by the EU, I'd like to explore another set of relationships that you will have, not only as special advisor to our ambassador to the EU, but as you know, Pierre Pettigrew is performing ad hoc diplomatic envoy service in pursuit of ratification of CETA. I'm just wondering how you will relate to him. What are the division of responsibilities? What are the reporting lines between the ambassador to the EU, yourself as a special advisor to the EU, and Mr. Pettigrew?
Mr. Kent, I know that you want CETA. I want CETA. We'll work together to be sure that it will work well for our economy and our people and our relationship with Europe. Mr. Pettigrew is doing that. I will do it as well. The Minister of Trade, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Prime Minister, the opposition, we are all in the same boat trying to make it working well for our country. I will work closely with you about that. I met Mr. Pettigrew more than once in the last weeks to discuss where are we and how can we make progress. I know Pierre very well. I'm sure we'll work very, very closely together.
And finally, I'd like to ask, what exactly is the definition of your special advisor role? This is a very unique role to the EU. Are you backseat driving the ambassador to the EU? Will you have special access to members of the EU or to the EU leadership? Please offer us a definition.
Yeah, I think since it's the Prime Minister idea, it's good to stick to his own words. And his words did not change over the months, always the same thing. And if I may quote him in last January, Mr. Dion will play a central role in advancing Canada's interest, ensuring coherence across the activities of Canadian missions, and providing strategic guidance to the Prime Minister. Mr. Dion's position will be an enormous strategic benefit for Canada. It will engage with European partners, the highest levels, on behalf of the Government of Canada, spending his time in both Brussels and Berlin and everywhere in Europe. It will be very demanding, but I'm in good health. I will do everything to deliver what the Prime Minister is asking me to do. And I know that this committee will also be a good advice for me.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. And we'll go to Mr. Fragascatos, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Monsieur Dion, thank you so much for being here today. In your book, Straight Talk, which was admittedly written a number of years ago, but I think is still highly relevant, especially for addressing a number of challenges that the world is facing today, you wrote, and I quote, in terms of Canada, our linguistic diversity has helped Canada become a model of openness celebrated throughout the world. With the rise of xenophobic sentiment in a number of European countries, I wonder if you could speak to Canada's role in terms of telling our story of diversity, linguistic diversity, multicultural diversity, and how we can serve as a model, if you like, or as an example for the world, a world that is grappling with so many challenges right now.
Thank you very much. It's true that we are perceived this way. In many corners of the world, they see Canada as a country of tolerance and openness. I think it's because of our history that has been very difficult, with a lot of dark pages. But at the end of the day, we had to invent other models than assimilation, and it helped us to welcome the world. This being said, we are not as good as the model describes us. We have a lot of progress to make. When I was in politics, I did my best to make improvements about our ability to be at the scope of the model we're identified with. But around the world, they look at us as, and our Prime Minister and our Parliament and all of us, as an inspiration in some ways. We should avoid to lecture the world. We should avoid to pretend that we are much better than others, but we should share the best practices, the best ideas, the best values, and Europeans are eager to do that. And it's certainly something I will be very pleased to participate in.
Can you talk about that? I've often wondered the tension that exists sometimes when a country such as Canada is trying to show itself as an example, but trying to avoid imposing its model or its story. Can you talk about how a country such as ours can avoid imposing and rather than, and instead engage in encouraging?
I think when we go in a country, let's say Germany, they had to accept almost 1 million people without any filter over 1 year. Imagine that in Canada. When our Prime Minister said we'll welcome 25,000 refugees from Syria, Canadians know that it will not be 250,000. And they know that we'll look what we are welcoming. So if we didn't have this ability to handle our immigration and refugee policy, I think we would be much more nervous about all these issues. So we need to understand what is the context in Europe. This being said, we should have tolerance zero for intolerance. And there are so many Germans, we share this view, tolerance zero for intolerance, that we need to work together with them with a deep understanding of the challenges they are facing.
You talk about the experience of accepting Syrian refugees here in Canada. I want to build off that if I could. Do you think that there is an opportunity here in your role to share best practices with European countries in terms of what we've done here in Canada? I know it also, at least as far as I understand, Britain is looking to Canada's private sponsorship system and looking at that as a way to approach accepting refugees and expanding its system along those lines. I wonder if you could speak to those points.
Yes, precisely because we are one of the few developed countries who have the ability to handle our immigration policy. We are an inspiration for many countries that don't have the ability to be surrounded by oceans and a big buffer that are the richest country, which is the richest country of the world at the south of our border. But we need to show that we have an ability to use this opportunity in a positive way to welcome the world and to be strong through our diversity. And as much as we may share these challenges and these solutions that we find working, we will have a lot of interest around the world, and especially today in Europe, to exchange about that. And our partnership strategic agreement has an aspect of it on these issues. And I will make sure that it's well coordinated, that it's more than just talks, but it results in best policies, both for Canada and for Europe.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fragascaros. Now to Madame Lavadière, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Et...
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Ambassador Designate. Thank you for being here today and for your interesting words. I quite agree with you that we're living in a crucial era, and there are challenges that are enormous. At the present time, relationships with a country like Germany or with the European Union are more important than ever. And I think, and I'll get back to what my colleague Mr. Kent said, this is why so many people were deeply troubled and had a lot of questions on the part of experts and veterans of the diplomacy. And myself, I am a diplomatic veteran, troubled by this double assignment, which had heretofore never been seen, and this at such a crucial time. And I think that we all have heard questions and the surprise on the part of people in the European Union. I was in Germany 2 weeks ago, and I heard comments that did not target you as an individual, but which targeted the decision to create this double assignment, this double diplomatic assignment. So I'd like to know, have you received your accreditation in Germany as ambassador? And I'd also like to better understand your role as a special envoy. Now, my question might seem silly, but you're a special advisor for Europe or for the European Union? I'm the Prime Minister's special envoy to the European Union and to Europe. So you're the PM Special Envoy to the European Union, the PM Special Envoy for Europe, and Canada's ambassador to Germany. That's correct. Well, in my experience in foreign affairs, given my experience, I can only wish you good luck because you're having to wear quite a few hats, and this at a very critical time. Now, I know that Dan Costello, who's the present ambassador in Brussels, I'd like to know what your relationship will be with Ambassador Costello, and will he retain all his present functions as ambassador? Well, yes. And he is an excellent ambassador, and we have excellent diplomats. It's one of our strengths, and we have excellent diplomats in Germany. The number 2 in Germany, Ms. Wiedeker and Jennifer May, is excellent. You probably know her. Mr. Costello is someone who is extremely effective. But what the Prime Minister has asked me to do, and I've discussed it with Mr. Costello, he's asked me to find a way to add to our European approach. Right now, we're very much absorbed by jurisdiction, the jurisdiction of the European Union in Europe. But we also have to look at all of Europe, and it's hard even for Europeans to look at the entire picture. And one of the reasons for this is that we didn't really have the tools to deal with this. But we'll soon have our strategic agreement. The Europeans tended in the past to forget us because they had issues to settle between each other, and we had issues to settle with our southern neighbor. So we want this added capacity to have a pan-European approach. Well, I'm going to try to get back to this question because I'm intrigued by the relationship you'll have with Ambassador Costello and what will be the division of tasks and of authorities. How much time will you be spending in Berlin? How much time will you be spending in Brussels? How often will you be traveling between the two? I'd like to know how all that will be organized. Well, I'm going to adapt. I think all this is quite feasible. I have a lot of capacity for hard work, and I will fulfill all the responsibilities of being ambassador to Germany. I will also be present in Brussels and elsewhere in Europe, wherever ambassadors ask me to come for important opportunities. And in each of these countries, I will be targeting the European aspect of each issue. Well, no, this does not target you personally. This is not really the work of the ambassador to Germany. It's a full-time job being ambassador to Germany. So I think we'll see. It might be interesting for the committee to welcome you again, perhaps by video conference. We don't want you to have to travel too much because you will already be traveling quite a bit. But if I have a bit more time, I'd like to get back to the issue of your relationship with the European Union and with other European countries. Your relationship with the various ambassadors. Is there a relationship of authority? It's more a relationship of complementarity. I will be dealing with the pan-European dimension of our work. Very often our ambassadors are caught up in the issues of their particular situation, but there is a pan-European dimension which is of concern to Canada, and we can't lose sight of it. So my responsibility is to make sure we never lose sight of it. And I believe that what will be of enormous help to me is the complementarity of the responsibilities that have been given by the Prime Minister. I want to strengthen the cohesion of our efforts in Europe. I will be, yes, in Germany, but what I do will be complementary. So when I have the pleasure of being invited to appear before your committee, I think you'll be able to see that the Prime Minister's innovation was something that really was necessary. I'd also like to talk about the G7 and about how you see the next G7 summit. Do I have a bit more time? So, if you wouldn't mind, will you please talk about what you see at stake at the next G7 meeting? Well, I'm no longer Minister of Foreign Affairs. I think that the Minister of Foreign Affairs would better answer your question. I think it's really up to the Foreign Minister to answer this question.
Mike?
Thank you, Ambassador Dion. Thank you for appearing here today, and congratulations on your appointments. It's been a pleasure to work with you over the years, over about 10 years, and I have no doubt that you're going to do Canada great pride in your activities in Germany and Europe more broadly. If I can ask you a little bit about multilateralism and keeping in mind the growing protectionist sentiment in Europe, the upcoming Brexit negotiations, what do you see as Canada's role in supporting multilateral institutions as Europe continues to go through this more protectionist dynamic?
I think it's a key role because in Canada, and it's beyond political parties, we know that we are a trade nation, a trading nation, that we need trade. And we have also the duty to show that if it's well negotiated, a free trade agreement is not a race to the bottom about social justice and environmental protection and worker rights and food safety. It's a way to spread the best practices. Let's talk a minute, if you allow me, about the environment. It's clear that we have a self-destructing development too many often as human beings in a relationship with the planet. And in order to shift it toward a sustainable development that will protect the ability of the next generations to have development, we need to spread the best practices to speed up innovation. And if we have protectionism, it will not be possible. So Canada to be open to Europe, Europe to Canada, is the best way, if it's well negotiated, and I think CETA has been well negotiated by both Canada and Europe, is the best way to address the environmental challenges that doesn't know any border. And Canada must show that it's the case when we negotiate with Europe or with the United States or with Asia.
Thank you. I want to move to a topic that I know is very important to you and certainly one that's been a focus for my work in Parliament, and that is international human rights. And certainly Germany, where you're going to be serving as ambassador, is a leading country in that regard. And of course, you're going to be working with other European countries also who will have great concerns over some of the international human rights abuses that we're seeing around the world, where Canada can play a strong voice and is playing a strong voice in terms of messaging out the importance of speaking out against the situations as they exist. So in particular, is there any areas, I mean, I'm looking at the continuing human rights abuses that we're seeing developing in Russia, as an example. We've seen a flare-up recently in Chechnya. But even beyond just the European borders, as we get into to other parts of the world, how do you see you being able to deliver and uphold and work with these new European partners on upholding international human rights across the globe?
It will be at the core of what we need to do with Europeans. You mentioned the challenges they are facing within Europe. And I just quoted President Tusk. I prefer to use his words than to put words in his mouth. So what he said is the xenophobia is on the rise in Europe. The protectionism, populism, this view of society that the people is facing an elite that is controlling the institutions, and then you need to toast the institutions in choosing a leader that will be the people. This kind of illiberal democratic model is strong in some countries in Europe already, and it's something that is a concern for Canadians and for Canada. So we need to work with Europe to be sure that strong liberal democratic values, the one that President Tusk mentioned, will succeed in Europe and around the world. When we speak about Europe, the EU especially, when we speak about the EU, it is the first donor of international aid around the world. And too often we work in parallel with them instead of working with them for human rights, for development, for environmental policies. So we have an opportunity now that we are an official strategic partner of Europe to be sure that each time that humankind needs a strong relationship between Canada and the EU, it will happen.
A little bit more time? Thanks. Chat, we've talked about the opportunities. There's many opportunities for you to be able to make a real difference on the ground in Europe. What do you think are the main challenges you're going to be facing? What are the real kind of uphill battles that you're going to dig in on, and where do you see those coming?
You will need to invite me again, as Madame Laverdière said, because I am eager to start. I think it will be, perhaps I said beginning of May, so we are beginning of May. It will happen pretty soon. I had a lot of exchanges with European officials about what we can do together. It's something that I'm eager to do. What will be the main challenges? We'll see. I see for now the main opportunities. I may, if I have time, maybe sum up 3 priorities.
Please.
That are not my priorities, but the Prime Minister priorities, since I am a special envoy. The first one is to make sure that our trade agreement will succeed for Canadians. The second one is what we just discussed. How can Canada may support Europe in the values that we share? And the third one is how can we strengthen our relationship with Europe when we work elsewhere in the world, including for the challenges you mentioned with our neighbor Russia, or development in Africa, emerging economies in Asia. We need to work with Europe about all this because we are in the same situation than them in so many ways.
Thank you very much.
And also our relationship with the United States.
Thank you, Ambassador.
It's not very long when you discuss with them that they raise this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Levitt. Mr. McKay, please.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations to friend and colleague for many years. I don't share the skepticism of my opposition colleagues with respect to the wisdom of your appointment, particularly with respect to its strategic position. Frequently, ambassadors are focused on their own domains, and as I would understand your position, it is to take a, if you will, a bit of a 35,000-foot look. The Prime Minister is fond of saying that our unity is in our diversity. In Europe, it seems to work in the reverse. At least right now, it seems to be working in the reverse. And you come in at a time where the European Union is undergoing significant stresses and strains. One of the strains, at a kind of a very high level, is whether it continues to be an Atlantic relationship, or whether it, if you will, in some parts spins off to the south or spins off to the east, particularly with Russian influence. So the relationship, the Atlantic relationship, is a non-starter unless the Americans are vigorous in their pursuit of Europe. Currently, under the current administration, the Americans seem somewhat less enthusiastic about Europe, particularly they're not pursuing the trade agreement, or would be an example. So this has enormous implications probably within your term. So my question to you is whether you've had any conversations with your American counterparts about the role that America chooses or doesn't choose to play in this Atlantic relationship.
You mean my European counterparts?
No, the American counterparts.
If I discuss with American counterparts about what Canada is doing in Europe?
No, what America is prepared to do in Europe, whether there is a changed relationship between America and Europe, and that will, in effect, affect the overall Atlantic relationship.
I'm not sure what you call my counterparts because I changed jobs recently, so I don't have the same counterparts than some months ago. And also the American administration changed in the meantime. I had a lot of discussions with Americans about the relationship between the United States and Europe and in which way Canada is maybe helpful in this relationship. And a lot of discussions with Europeans themselves. We are in the same situation. We want to keep an open relationship with the United States, especially for trade. We want to avoid any trade disputes. And this committee is working on this issue as well. I may tell you, it's not very long when you sit with a European official that they raise the issue and said how you Canadians will cope with that. It's 75% of your trade market, the United States. And what kind of approach you have of this problem, and how can you solve it, and what can we learn from it? And we'll try, we Canadians, to learn from what the Europeans will do, especially Germany, which has been identified as a key aspect of the relationship with the United States regarding trade by the President of the United States. So to strengthen our relationship with Europe can only help in our challenges we have to face to keep a very strong and positive relationship with the United States.
We have frequently found ourselves as kind of intermediaries between the U.S. and others, based upon, if you will, body language between Chancellor Merkel and President Trump. That's a relationship. That's a critical relationship that doesn't appear to be going as well as one would hope. Germany is in going through an election. I have no insight as to how that's going to turn out. So, describe how your role as a strategic advisor would unfold in that kind of a dynamic.
When I was with the Prime Minister in Germany some weeks ago, I may tell you how much the Germans want to share with us any understanding we may have of the relationship with the United States. It's key for them. They have a lot of interest about that and about the capacity of Canada to be working with the United States while staying in Canada. So that will certainly be a large part of my ability to reach the officials in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, and to have a very dynamic relationship with them. And about the United States, the more we show that we are improving our ability to be strong in Europe, the more it will help us to negotiate with the United States. If you look as having no other solution, it doesn't put you in a strong footing as a country. But Canada being stronger with Europe, to be stronger with Asia, you will have Ambassador John will be with you just after me. I think it's key for the future of our country.
Finally, Russia seems to be stirring the pot. And I don't know whether it's having some success, but it certainly is stirring the pot. Germany is uniquely positioned as, if you will, the most European of nations, up next against the East European nations and then Russia. So describe your, if you will, what have you learned about Russia's role in not only in Germany, but in the European Union, which has surprised you or not since you've taken on this position?
What we look at in this situation is to be sure that our European allies will stay very strong. There are links with Russia for the economy, especially the ability to receive the natural
gas.
Is very demanding for some of these countries, and we don't want them to mollify in order to stay united and strong in our relationship, difficult relationship with Russia. And also, some of these countries have a very important dialogue with Russia. And I think, as you know, we Canadians have an interest to be well aware of that, because the NATO official policy and actual policy is both deterrence and dialogue. And dialogue is something that is key for the future of this very complex relationship that we have with our neighbor, Russia. And by the way, it leads me also to mention that Germany, as you say, is at the core of these discussions with Russia and is key to keep a strong deterrence. They will be in the Baltic countries with us. And for me to be then the special envoy of the Prime Minister, in addition to be an ambassador, will be, I hope, an asset for our country from this perspective.
Thank you very much, Mr. McCain. We'll go to Ms. Kamiec, please. Tom.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Donc, je pense que plusieurs personnes maintenant ont utilisé.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think people have talked about your role as a special advisor, an envoy, an ambassador. Now, with respect to your role as special envoy to the European Union, according to the press release, there was an exchange of letters between the President of the European Commission and the European Council as to your role as special envoy. Are you aware of the content of these letters? Yes, I have them here. And I quoted some of the main excerpts, in my presentation. And they're very happy to have this new diplomatic resource that I represent. Well, Mr. Kent said that the fact of being a dual ambassador, in his questioning, we learned that idea came from the Prime Minister. So this special envoy idea, was this the Prime Minister's idea, your idea, Mr. Tusk's idea, Mr. Kerr's idea? Well, the Prime Minister's idea never changed. The title changed because it expressed better what the Prime Minister wanted to do in the beginning. And when I get to a European country, I am the PM's special envoy, as well as being ambassador to Germany. And it's more clear than saying I am ambassador to the European Union, because that would only mean the jurisdiction of the EU, whereas what I'm doing covers far more than the European Union, far more of Europe. Now that we have ambassadors in countries like Italy, Spain, Poland, Georgia, and not all these countries, like Georgia, is not in the European Union. And the tensions between Ukraine and Russia, these are countries that are not in the European Union, but they have a European dimension. Switzerland is not in the European Union, nor is Norway. And there is the whole issue of the Arctic, which is beyond the Europe itself, but it affects Europe. And this is what the Prime Minister had in mind. So this title of Special Envoy, why wasn't it given to you at the beginning? It would have made things a lot more clear. And it wouldn't have been a political issue or diplomatic issue in Canada or in Europe, as Madame Laverdière and Mr. Kent said. it did lead to questions, and it was a bit of a diplomatic shock for certain people in Europe. So why wasn't this done at the beginning? Why weren't you named special envoy, special advisor to the Prime Minister, rather than trying to have another post of ambassador to Europe? Well, I think it's an improvement that resulted from internal discussions and also domestic discussions and also discussions with our European friends. It's something that will allow me to say in one phrase, in a few words, what I'm doing and how I bear on our relationship with Europe.
You a diplomatic invitation, I guess, to become an ambassador, the agrément. Doesn't that undermine your credibility then? Do you believe it undermines your credibility with the Union and with our European allies?
No, and in which way it would? I don't understand the question.
Well, if they would not take you as an ambassador, then I don't really understand what this role of special envoy would be. And I also don't understand the limits of this European mandate that you've been given. Does it include Russia? Does it include Turkey? Members here have talked about, human rights worldwide. They've talked about relationships with America. I'm trying to understand the confines of this role that you have. And, if you put everything into it, then you have no role. If you put a very restricted mandate to it, then it's less than an ambassador. It's something else. I'm trying to understand, did Canada hurt its credibility by trying to appoint 2 ambassadors in the beginning instead of appointing a special envoy from the start, providing a very strict mandate and explaining it to our European allies instead of coming up with stuff by ourselves and then telling our European allies how it's going to be?
No, I think...
that's not it? So please explain to me.
I don't think so. You're entitled to have your own concerns, but I don't think they are shared at all by our European allies. To the contrary, as you will see in the letters that are tabled now for this committee, their reaction is very positive, and it's reflecting exactly what the Prime Minister had in mind at the outset. When you have challenges like what is happening in Turkey or in Russia in its relationship with European neighbors, there is a European perspective on it that is in many ways shared by Canada, and it's difficult to address it only through a bilateral relationship with every country. You need to have a European perspective, and it will be my responsibility to develop it.
So what is the confines of your mandate? Does your Europe include Russia? Does it include Turkey?
It does not include Russia, but it includes the Russian dimension of the European challenges.
Okay. So when you were shuffled out of the cabinet, there were a lot of media reports that said you took weeks to decide whether to take on this role, to become ambassador to Germany, to become ambassador to the European Union, I guess Europe as well. Is it correct? Did it take you weeks? And was part of it the trepidation of you said you're fine with the workload, you obviously seem in good health, so you can take this on. But what was it about the roles originally that made you take several weeks to decide whether to take on this?
I don't know. If you go home and you say to your wife, darling, we go to Berlin, what would be her reaction? I think
my wife would be very happy.
Some discussions would be needed, eh? It took some weeks. I had also an offer from University in Montreal, and the perspective to be home every evening for the first time over 21 years was interesting. It was a very generous offer, and I love to be a teacher. I love to be at the public service for Canadians, so I needed to make a choice, and it took some time.
I have time for more. Perfect. So maybe if I could just go back to the reporting relationship that you'll have with the ambassador to the European Union. So because you said you're the special envoy to the Prime Minister, so I'm trying to understand, will you be reporting to Ambassador Costello, or are you cooperating with him? Are you coordinating with him, or is there some type of reporting relationship to him? And if not, is your reporting relationship solely to the Prime Minister?
I will work very closely with Ambassador Costello. He's an easy person to work with. We'll have a very collegial relationship, I'm sure, that will benefit to Canadians. I will have some responsibilities that are beyond the one of an ambassador in a country or in an international organization like the European Union. For example, to give an example, the Prime Minister asked me to have a yearly meeting of all head of missions in Europe, and after to report it to the cabinet. So it's not something other ambassadors will have to do, but it shows to you that indeed the Prime Minister felt that something was lacking, a kind of European dimension of our efforts over the continent.
Okay, and is there a reason why the Minister of Foreign Affairs can't be doing that?
The Minister of Foreign Affairs will be well involved in all of this. Will work very closely with Minister Freeland, and I'm very pleased to do so. And she's welcoming the ability of having a special envoy of the Prime Minister, helping to pull together all our efforts in Europe.
Okay.
Colleagues, we're going to wrap it up and take a 5-minute suspension as we go to our next witness. So on behalf of the committee, Ambassador, I want to say thank you very much. We will take you up on your offer, and you can table those this information to us. This has been very informative.
I have copies for everyone.
Okay, very good, thank you. And to both of you, very much a thank you for participating, and good luck with your very important role in Europe and Germany particularly. Thank you, Ambassador. Colleagues, we'll take a 5-minute suspension.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, I won't be able to make it. Okay, I'll give it to you.
Colleagues, we'll bring this meeting back to order, and as is the process, pursuant to Standing Order 110 and 111, order and council appointment of the Honourable John McCallum to the position of Ambassador to China. Welcome, Mr. McCallum. And with Mr. McCallum is David Hamilton, who's the Deputy Director, Greater China Division. Welcome to Mr. Hamilton. As per the usual, Ambassador, you'll get some time to make some opening comments, and then we'll go right into questions from our colleagues around the table. We're well warmed up now. We've had Mr. Dion here, so we're in the groove. So we're looking forward to spending some time talking to you about your important role vis-a-vis China. So I'll turn it over to yourself, Ambassador, for your opening comments, and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and it's a real pleasure for me to be back. I've been in China 5 weeks, and I think it's a great position, but this place gets in one's blood a bit, so I'm always pleased to return. And I guess my theory is that part of my job is persuading China, but part of my job is persuading Canada. So it's good to be in both places, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you today. I think, to get to the core of things, it's a fantastic time for Canada to strengthen our ties with China. As I'll explain, we have much to gain through building stronger ties with China, and the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and stakeholders across the country are keen to do just that. It takes two to tango, and I have a strong sense that the Chinese are also keen to work with us. Since the stars will not always be aligned so positively, now is the time to seize the moment and be ambitious. Now is the time to act. And that, with the support of the government, is exactly what I am planning to do. Let me start at the beginning. Within 24 hours of arriving in China, I was invited to present my credentials to President Xi Jinping, and I conveyed to him a message from our Prime Minister that can be summarized in 3 words: more, more, more. Or in Mandarin, geng dua, geng dua, geng dua. I'm having 6 hours a week of Mandarin lessons to improve my skills in that area. And so we want, in both directions, more trade, more investment, more tourists, more students, more cooperation in every conceivable area. And the President seemed to like that sentiment. And I would point out to you that more, more, more also translates into more, more, more jobs for Canadians, because every time we have more tourists from China, more exports to China, more investment in Canada from China, that has a strong tendency to create jobs in Canada. I also explained to the President in my very poor Mandarin something which some of you may have heard, that my affinity to China can be explained by 3 numbers, 150, 40. My wife is 100% Chinese. My 3 boys are 50% Chinese, and the good people of Markham who elected me for 16 years are 40% Chinese. And the President smiled and he said, no need for translation, I subsequently learned, so I like to think he understood what I said. But look, China's a two-way street. So before elaborating on why I think there's so much to gain, I also want to comment on the fact that there are many issues on which Canada and China disagree. We disagree on the death penalty. We disagree on some aspects of the rule of law, and privately and publicly on how the Chinese government treats human rights advocates. We have a continuing keen interest in the integrity of Hong Kong's autonomous institutions under the one country, two systems formula. That's why the consular side of my job is critical, and also why in my first 6 weeks on the job, I spent time meeting and supporting an LGBTQ group in Shanghai, female entrepreneurs in a group working to counter domestic violence in Beijing, and a woman called Qing Qian, whose organization, Educating Girls of Rural China, has done fantastic work educating low-income girls over many, many years. So that side of the job is very important. But in particular, I'd like to take this opportunity to address head-on an issue which has generated some controversy among Canadians, namely Canada's decision to discuss extradition issues with China. While we are a long, long, long way from negotiating an extradition treaty with China, we've agreed to talk about the issues that need to be addressed for China or any other country to meet our high standards. This includes things like the death penalty and the importance of high standards of evidence in court proceedings. We lose nothing by explaining our system and talking about the values we hold dear. So let me now come to the other side of the coin, the more positive side, as to why China is important to Canada. China is the world's largest emitter of CO2, but it's also the world's biggest investor in renewable energy, investing $103 billion in 2015, which is more than 2.5 times what the United States invested. So if Canada is serious about climate change, which we are, and if we're serious about selling our clean tech innovations to the world, which we are, then we have no choice but to engage China. China also has 20% of the world's women and girls. And China is increasingly a key player in places like Africa, which face real challenges to women's health and education. So if we want to improve the plight of women and girls around the world, then China is a key partner. And the same can be said on working with China in the area of peacekeeping. Also, if we want to engage positively on North Korea and other regional and security issues, we need to work with China. Fentanyl is the cause of a major public health crisis in Canada with over 1,000 deaths, and much of those drugs come from Canada. If we want to address this crisis, we must work with China. And I might say the Chinese government has cooperated well in working with us on this crisis. And last but not least, if we want jobs and prosperity for Canadians, then once again, China is an essential partner. So whether we're talking about climate change, the plight of women and girls, the fentanyl issue, key security issues, or the prosperity of Canadians, in all of these cases, China is a key partner. So let me turn quickly, because I think I'm running out of time, to some of the key economic issues. Premièrement, le tourisme.
First of all, tourism. And for me, I think tourism may be our #1 priority. And it's a question of numbers. I went to Zhengzhou. It's a city of maybe the second or third level size, but 10 million people. And at the same time, President Xi said that over the next 5 years, there will be 700 million Chinese tourists. So the possibilities for Canada are enormous, and it's quite clear that an increase in Chinese tourists would lead to the creation of many jobs in Canada.
Other economic sectors which are of great importance, wood products. Minister Champagne had a very successful and well-timed visit to China last week, where we spoke to a number of government and private sector wood people, and I think we made good progress in terms of increasing Canada's exports of forest products to China. Agri-food, we are #5 now in China. We could become #3 if we work hard. There's a huge demand for healthy, nutritious food, such as comes from Canada. Clean tech and environment is another major opportunity. China and Canada are both signatories to the Paris Agreement. China has important environmental and energy efficiency objectives, and so there are good opportunities in that area. Education has always been a pillar of our relationship, and that has scope to blossom even further. And Minister Joly, Qualtrough, Philpott, and Sajjan are working to enhance our ties in their own areas of culture, sports, health, and defense. Finally, e-commerce is critical. We all know that small and medium-sized companies don't export very much often, even to the United States, let alone to China. China is a leader in e-commerce. The Prime Minister has spoken to Jack Ma, head of Alibaba. I have spoken to him. We are working together to get more Canadian small companies to get onto the Chinese e-commerce system, which will be a very important way in which we are able to increase exports to China. And so, Mr. Chair, I will leave it at that. Je vous remercie et j'attends.
I thank you, and I await your questions.
As I understand it, we'll be able to complete our full time. I think the votes will be around 11, so we'll be fine. So we'll start right off with Mr. Kemp, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Ambassador. Even as you begin your new assignment, China has appointed a new ambassador to Canada, and Ambassador Liu She is demanding that China be allowed to participate and invest in all sectors of the Canadian economy. And he has said very bluntly on a number of occasions that security concerns about state-owned enterprises investing in Canadian companies and human rights concerns are not up for discussion. Now, when you presented your diplomatic credentials directly to President Xi, and that's a very great honor, did you raise human rights concerns over the lack of due process? You mentioned this, the death penalty, extrajudicial abuse of anyone considered a pro-democracy challenge to the Chinese Communist government, and the president's stated intention recently to outlaw foreign human rights activists and missionaries, let alone the Chinese hacking of a number of Canadian government departments. Were you able to raise any of those Canadian, very legitimate tangible Canadian concerns with President Xi?
Well, let me just go back to your point about the new Chinese ambassador to Canada. I've seen the transcript of his interview, and it was somewhat taken out of context by the media reports. But that being said, it is very clear that national security concerns are of great importance to the government, and that whenever a Chinese or investment from any country is proposed which carries security concerns, that it has to go through a rigorous review, and that has not changed. In terms of the rules governing state-owned enterprises in Canada, which you mentioned, those have been changed by the previous government. They have not been changed back. That could be an issue in a free trade negotiation, but no decision at all has been made. That point has not been raised with us, raised by the Chinese with me to date. In terms of my conversation with President Xi, it was less than 5 minutes, and it was largely scripted, so I did not specifically on that occasion raise the question of those issues that you raise. They are nevertheless of critical importance to the government, as I indicated in my remarks. I know that Prime Minister Trudeau raised those issues with his counterpart, and I have served 3 Canadian Liberal Prime Ministers in their cabinets, Chrétien, Martin, and Trudeau too, and I know that in each of those cases they have spoken frankly and freely to their Chinese counterparts about Canadian concerns over human rights and other such matters.
Now, with regards to human rights, and you raised your consular responsibilities, we've just learned that a Canadian citizen named Kian Sun was detained during a visit to China on February 19th this year, accused of being a Falun Gong practitioner, and is now being held in the Beijing First Detention Center. Ms. Sun is a Canadian citizen whose home is in Vancouver, and she's vice president of Beijing Ledman Biochemistry Company Limited. Are you aware of her case, and will you, within your consular responsibilities, raise her case with the Chinese authorities?
I'm certainly aware of her case and other cases. Just before, I've had several briefings on consular cases before I went to China, and also just before coming back here when I was in China. In all cases, we have regular consular visits to ensure that they are being treated properly, and that is the case in this person's situation. when I said that I take my consular responsibility seriously, I was being serious. And so some of these cases are elevated to a situation where even the leaders will have to deal with them. And so we are prepared to act where it is required, and I'm kept informed of the situation in each of those cases.
Now, in most cases involving human rights persecution in China for religious or philosophical beliefs or pro-democracy advocacy, it involves the little people, ordinary citizens of China. But there is one more notable consular case, a very high-profile case, where the Canadian government, the Prime Minister's office, has called in former Prime Minister Mulroney, among others, to act. And I wonder if you could tell us, give us an update on the case of the Chinese-Canadian billionaire, Mr. Zhan Zhao, who was kidnapped from his residence in Hong Kong by Chinese security agents and transported to China for what seems to be extrajudicial prosecution for perceived white-collar crimes. Again, Canada seems to be doing more for this billionaire than for someone like Kian Sun.
Well, I have certainly been briefed on that case, and we are certainly have been in touch with that individual. I don't think it's a good idea, either for legal reasons or for the sake of the individuals in question, for me to comment publicly on individual cases. That doesn't always help the person in detention if we broadcast their own situation in public. So I think in those cases, almost all the time, it is better to proceed in a low-profile way in order to do the best we can to help those individuals.
Although I know that, and I certainly receive any number of messages, correspondence from Canadian citizens who are expressing concern at what they consider to be an imbalance between the Canadian government's pursuit of trade and much less vocal, specific or general discussion of Canada's concerns, very real concerns about human rights.
Well, look, as I have said, I take that part of my job seriously. There was an issue involving criticism by a number of governments of the Chinese in terms of possible torture, and this was something that the Chinese were not happy with us about. So there's one very recent example of a case where Canada has spoken out publicly. And so what I'm telling you is that while in many cases it doesn't serve the person well who is in custody, we do speak both privately and publicly on issues which are of concern to Canadians, and we as well as the government hold these Canadian values dear, and we are not shy to speak out on them. And in particular, we work very hard on any cases of death penalty. There are now 5 death penalty cases pending, and we are working very hard to persuade the Chinese authorities, as we would work hard to persuade any government authorities, including the United States, not to exercise the death penalty on Canadian citizens.
But wouldn't you agree, and while I agree, very briefly, while I certainly agree that there are times to be silent while negotiating the release of political prisoners, wouldn't you say that in the case of a recent high-profile individual who was arrested, detained, tortured with sensory deprivation in a variety of ways, and released to Canada, that Canada should then speak about the completely unacceptable way in which he was mishandled and abused by Chinese authorities?
I certainly think in some cases that would be true. In other cases, there might have been an agreement that was a condition of his release. It will depend on each case.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ken, I'll go to Mr. Sani, please.
Good afternoon, Ambassador. Good morning, Ambassador. Great to see you again.
Good morning, yes.
Good afternoon for you, probably.
Evening,
evening, okay. I want to ask you a question about the TPP and its demise. As you know, and you're probably well aware, there were geopolitical calculations that were made at a time to exclude China from that agreement. And now, as the United States has recused themselves from participating in the TPP, there's still a lot of interest in pursuing that agreement without the United States, including Canada, especially from the Japanese. So my question is, now there is great interest between Canada and China to formulate some sort of free trade agreement. Do you think it would be more ideal to fold those 11 countries that are still interested, or 10 countries that are still interested, and if China take over the place of the United States, or would it be better to have, one separate deal with China and maybe see if there's an interest with having the remaining countries that were originally part of the TPP?
Okay, that's a good question. My mandate as ambassador is simple, that we are in exploratory talks on a free trade agreement with China. That's a bilateral arrangement. I can answer questions about that if you wish, but that is currently my mandate. But if you look more generally, the Canadian government is in favor of free trade as a matter of principle. And speaking as an economist, I think the best free trade agreement is a global free trade agreement under GATT, or what used to be GATT, what is now WTO, but that has proven elusive to the world. And so countries have pursued various forms of regional free trade agreements, including TPP, which is now seemingly not working. So while my mandate is just this bilateral deal, I would say as a matter of principle that Canada is always open to various regional configurations on free trade arrangements, whether it's the TPP or some new configuration, given that the U.S. is no longer apparently interested. I am sure we as a government would be interested in exploring those. But in terms of my specific job right now, it's really focusing on the China-Canada bilateral discussions.
So if we look at China's involvement now, you can see that they've evolved into having their own infrastructure bank. Yeah. And if you look at their initiative within China to expand trade within China and outside of China with the One Belt or One Road initiative, to me, it seems like a very clear opportunity for Canadian high-tech companies, whether they be in aerospace or transportation, to somehow have a presence there to make sure that we participate in, I think, a grand venture that the Chinese have started. Do you think that there is some recognition of that or comment?
Well, I certainly think it's a good idea that Canada agreed, albeit belatedly, to join this infrastructure bank. It would have been better if we'd been a founding member, but that's now water under the bridge. It is good for Canada to be a member of that Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. And we also are going to have participation in the One Belt, One Road conference, although we're not on the route, but many countries who are not on the route are nevertheless participating. And I think one thing China and Canada have in common is infrastructure. This Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank is a Chinese initiative. We have our own infrastructure bank that is in the process of being set up. And as you know, infrastructure has been a major part of the government's program to help create jobs. So I think there's great scope for Canadian companies to get involved in the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. And I think there's a community of interest in terms of China and Canada, both pushing infrastructure as major initiatives.
The other, probably the final question I'll ask is a question based on the security of the South China Sea. As you know, there has been tension there. There was a recent announcement or a recent ruling that, that China does not claim the South China Sea. And I'm just wondering, when you look at the tensions that are there, especially the importance of that seaway, where $5 trillion of trade goes down that seaway every year, is there any opportunity? Because one thing Canada has always been very effective with is its attractive diplomacy and making sure that we work behind the scenes to create some sort of dialogue or some sort of agreement. Do you think that in this situation, going forward, that Canada would have or should have a role to play to sort of mitigate the sort of tension that might appear in that area of the world?
Well, our position has always been clear that we want China to respect the international law on this issue. As to whether there could be some quiet diplomacy in which Canada might have an impact, I certainly think that is a possibility. My counterpart, our ambassador at the UN, Marc-André Bédard, is likely to be visiting China at the time of this Belt and Road Conference, and he at the UN is very seized of these issues, and so I think his visit as well as the foreign affairs minister, of course, later on, provide opportunity for discussion of these regional issues which are of great importance to Canada, and I do think there's an opportunity for more interaction with China in those areas.
Just one last quick point. Just as a comparison with Australia, it seems to me that in terms of public opinion, the Australian public is a little bit more favorable to having Chinese investment in their economy, that they look in a more favorable way about their impact in the world. And as compared to Canada, the public opinion is much less here. What can we do, or what do you think your role is to sort of highlight the strategic importance of having strong relations with China?
Okay, I sometimes am guilty of what you might call a little bit of Australia envy. They have twice as many Chinese tourists as Canada does, and it's not that much further to get to Canada than to Australia. And
more students also, I believe.
More students as well. Now, I shouldn't be too anxious about that in one sense, because they don't have the United States. We have the United States right beside us, so geographically and historically, it's natural for us to do so much trade with the U.S., which Australia doesn't have. But nevertheless, I would say Australia is a role model for Canada in many ways in terms of the strength of their relationship, which they have created with China. And in terms of your question about public opinion, well, I think part of the reason I plan to come back to Canada every 6 to 8 weeks is because I think there are as many challenges in Canada as there are in China in terms of getting done what I want to get done. So it's to talk to people in Ottawa, to talk to stakeholders across the country, but also to try to talk to Canadians through the media about the importance of China in Canada's future, but not shying away from the negative things about human rights, which we were talking about earlier. So being balanced, we have to look at both. There are clearly important areas where we disagree with China, but at the same time, there's huge opportunity for Canada and for Canadian jobs to have closer ties with China, and I think that's the message that I'm trying to impart.
Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ni hao ma.
And thank you for Sissy for your quite extensive presentation. In fact, you've touched most of the point I wanted to raise, as well as Mr. Kent, on human rights and consular affairs, but I still have a few points I'd like to raise. And the first one would be, what's your perspective on China's current attitude towards North Korea?
C'est une très bonne question, mais étant donné que vous m'avez posé...
That's a very good question, but since you put the question in English, I'll answer in English.
Is a huge security concern for the whole world. And it is also true that China is the principal supplier of materials and goods and services to North Korea, and China has more influence over North Korea by far than any other country. And so, but, you know, China doesn't have complete influence over North Korea. North Korea tends to march to its own drummer, but China has an influence. And so the issue is what steps China might take. And, you know, we have certainly been monitoring this very carefully. I've been in touch with my counterpart, Canada's ambassador to Korea, and events of recent weeks have been of great concern. So it's not really my area because I'm China, not Korea, but I would just say that my sense is that China is in the process of taking stronger actions vis-a-vis North Korea. Okay. I think they were already on that path before the interaction with the U.S. government, but my sense is that the two presidents meeting has tended to push China to be more proactive in terms of trying to rein in North Korea, but I think they were already on that path. But it remains an area that is difficult to predict and of huge concern, obviously to the people of South Korea, but also to the whole world.
Merci beaucoup. Et oui, je pense que...
Thank you. And sometimes we confuse a foreign language. Perhaps what I said in Mandarin sounded like something else. You mentioned during your presentation that you held a seminar on LGBTQ rights. I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit longer about this community in China. Thank you. Yes, I had a very good conversation with people in Shanghai who've been demonstrating for 9 years. Their 10th anniversary is coming soon. We have been supporting them, and we will continue to do so. One of their problems, and it's the same thing in Canada, but it's far worse in China. If one is gay, the major problem is being able to say this to one's family. And in China in particular, this is a real problem. Sometimes we were asked for help and support, so I talked to one of our members, Rob Oliphant, one of our members of parliament, and he talked to a Chinese friend, and they will be having a telephone conversation soon, or rather a Skype conversation. And perhaps a Canadian will go to China to discuss the situation with them and perhaps be able to give them advice. And I think that this is something that is of interest, a field of interest to work in. A more technical question. How many missions do we have in China at the present time, including consulates? We have 4, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Chongqing, and Guangzhou. Okay, thank you. Hong Kong is a bit different, but including Hong Kong, there are 4. And getting back to the question of politics or policies, what about global issues on which it's important to maintain a dialogue with China, for example, regarding Africa? Because it seemed to us that there was a bit of a withdrawal on the part of China with respect to Syria. China abstained from certain votes at the UN. Is this the kind of question you've had an opportunity to discuss with the Chinese authorities? For example, the situation in the Middle East. Not yet. I've been there for 5 weeks, and I've had quite a few meetings, but I haven't had the opportunity to discuss those issues. I think their abstentions represent a really good development. And our Foreign Affairs Minister will be in China in the upcoming months. And it's quite possible we'll have that opportunity for dialogue then.
Ready? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Mr. McCallum. It's a pleasure to have
Good
you
morning.
in front of the committee. And congratulations on learning Mandarin within 5 weeks.
That's an overstatement. I say I have 10 hours a week of Mandarin, which means I'm making progress from a very low base.
I give you full credit.
Thank you.
Ambassador, you have spoken at length about any potential Canada-China free trade agreement must present tangible economic benefits to Canadian, especially new jobs. In an interview in March, you noted that the crucial point will be whether we can persuade the average Canadian or average Canadian worker whether it is good for him or her. Can you speak a little more about this issue?
That certainly sounds like an accurate quotation. I did say that at the end of the day, the government has to determine whether this deal is good for the average Canadian worker. And Prime Minister Trudeau has used the same words. And so, the government is open to freer trade, open borders. In that respect, we have some affinity with China. If you look at President Xi Jinping's speech in Davos, was along similar lines. But so in principle, we support free trade agreements and open borders. But not all Canadians are there. And so I think the government would only wish to pursue a free trade agreement if we believed that it was good for the average Canadian worker, and that therefore we would be able to persuade Canadians that this was a good thing. And so the government has not yet come to a final determination on that. Their exploratory talks are still going on. Consultations of industry are still happening. But, you can go along two tracks. Free trade exploratory talks are going on, and that's good. But at the same time, independent of that, we are pursuing initiatives in the area of tourism, in the area of agri-food, in the area of forest products, and other areas, clean tech. So not everything waits till the free trade situation is settled. We are simultaneously proceeding in areas that are really important for Canada, and more importantly, really important for Canadian jobs. And the more we can produce arrangements with China, like in tourism, but also other areas, that clearly create Canadian jobs, I think the more open Canadians will be towards closer ties with China.
I know you touched on a lot of different sectors where we can explore. Since you touched the forestry, I'm from British Columbia. Can you speak on one particular sector where you're going to be focusing on, or is it diverse focus on every commodity there is under CTA, under FTA?
We've been in the business of selling wood to China for a long time. I remember when I was Minister of Natural Resources briefly back in 2005, going on a trip to China to sell Canadian wood. So that's, 12 years ago. We've been talking about that for a long time, and we have made a lot of progress in those years. There is a model Canadian city made of wood in Tianjin, and we want the Chinese to see that and to adopt that in other cities. The history of China is they don't traditionally build things with wood, so it's an education process. And it's a process of getting them to change their bylaws and their various rules to make it easier for them to use more wood. But the good news is that the Chinese are really seized on energy efficiency, environmental targets, and wood is good for that. And so we are combining our wood efforts with our environmental efforts, and we think that there will be good further progress made in terms of selling more Canadian forest products to China. But we also have to ensure that our own forest industry is serious about their engagement with China, not just on and off depending on the state of the U.S. market, but a serious effort to build relationships and ties with China, as well as the larger market in the U.S. So we're working with the Canadian industry and with the Chinese authorities to try to create a situation which will create significant additional demand for Canadian forest products, not just from British Columbia, but also from other parts of the country.
Well, we have 50% of the wood product comes from British Columbia, so
yeah, I have nothing against British Columbia. All I'm saying is that some of the wood might also come from other places like Quebec and other provinces.
Quebec is number two.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, number two, Ambassador, growing perfectionist rhetoric across the globe, from our neighbors to south to Europe. I would be interested to hear your thoughts on the importance of Canada continuing to persistently seek out progressive trade deals with China and emerging markets around the world.
Well, I think that's what we're doing. We're having these exploratory talks with China. We've just completed a European free trade agreement. We're having talks with India and no doubt with other countries around the world. And we want it to be a progressive deal. Three things we have already mentioned to the Chinese that we would like to see included in a possible free trade deal are a chapter on gender issues, a chapter on environment, a chapter on labor. So those are important issues which the Chinese haven't necessarily fully dealt with or registered in previous free trade arrangements, but those are things which Canada is pushing for.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
We'll go to Mr. Fragascatos, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations, Ambassador McCallum, for your appointment, and thank you very much for being here today.
Pleasure.
The issue of human rights has come up today. You were asked about it, and to your credit, you even raised it at the outset in your remarks. I wonder if you could talk in general terms about the importance of engaging countries that Canada might have concerns with respect to human rights, rather than isolating oneself. Engagement allows for a dialogue. You can put human rights concerns onto the table. And I wonder if you could speak to that point.
Well, look, I think
at least that's how I see it.
Human rights are a essential concern of the Canadian government. We just talk about that inside the embassy every day. We spend a lot of time on consular issues. It is fundamental to what we do. And on your question of engaging, as I think I said in my comments, you don't not talk to somebody just because you think they might disagree with you. I mean, if you did that, you'd never talk to the opposition because they might disagree with you, so don't talk. I think the better strategy is you engage. And sometimes when the disagreement is potentially the biggest, it's the time when there are maximum gains from that engagement. So I believe that Prime Ministers Chrétien, Martin, and Trudeau, the ones I have served, have engaged their counterparts on human rights issues and things of that nature, and we are continuing to do that at a lower level. So it is something we are seized of, it is something fundamental to our mission, and it is something that we do talk to our Chinese counterparts about, whether publicly, often privately, but sometimes publicly as well. And we also talk to like-minded countries all the time. You know, it's hard. I would say Canada, I'm told, is among the top 3 in China to raise these issues, but there are certainly many other countries which are as seized of these things as we are, and ambassadors and others in our embassies often talk to each other on the best way to proceed on these things, because we are, by and large, we are like-minded on these issues. If you look at the Western countries, we mostly think along similar lines, and we often work together to pursue this agenda.
Thank you. Ambassador, you spoke in your comments about China's turn to green technology. And I wonder if you could explore briefly the interest in China in that area, and the impetus. What exactly is motivating China to turn to that? I understand that obviously there's a great deal of money to be made in investments, as they've made in solar technology and wind technology, huge investments. However, they're also experiencing real concerns around climate and air quality in particular in some of their major cities. Could you speak to that?
Okay, I live in Beijing now, and Beijing is well known around the world for its bad air. And the people who live there notice that. Now, to be fair to Beijing, I've been there 5 weeks, and the air's been great, and the skies have been blue, and the weather has been wonderful. So I'm sure that won't always be the case. But certainly, China has signed on to the Paris Agreement. China as a country is committed to do its bit for global warming. And as I said, it's the biggest emitter of CO2 and by far the biggest spender on clean energy. So on both counts, China's in there. And this is something I remember Prime Minister Harper always said. How can we engage on global warming without China? Well, I agree with Mr. Harper on that. This is an area in which we must engage with China. And I've also said that just about every minister I've spoken to who is engaged with China is keen. And right on the top of the list for keenness, I'm not saying alone, but among the leaders for enthusiasm would be our Environment Minister, and our Natural Resources Minister. So the Natural Resources Minister, Jim Carr, is going to China in June, and he's going to have meetings on wood and other things. And Minister McKenna will be there, I think, in December, having had a very proactive visit last year. So we are heavily engaged on the environmental stroke clean tech side of it. Both ministers, well, one in June and one in December, will be actively engaging China. And so I think this is one area in which China and Canada are like-minded, and I also think it provides opportunities, economic opportunities, for some of our companies in the clean tech field, and also for research between China and Canadian universities in carbon capture and storage, and also action in that area. So I think that is one of the big areas where more cooperation can bear fruit.
You've touched on the question that I wanted to follow up with, which was opportunities for Canadian firms. So I'll conclude with this. We have a very active and vibrant Chinese diaspora, obviously with your experience in marketing.
I know a bit about that,
better than most. I wonder, as we are engaged in exploratory talks now on free trade with China, and as that discussion continues, and hopefully materializes into something much more, I wonder if you could speak to the potential for the Chinese diaspora to engage in this process and help along this process.
I think they're central to it, and as you said, I know a bit about it. I've said ad nauseam that 40% of my electors are Chinese, were in Markham, and so I know that community well, and I think that they are a very important bridge to China. Often when groups visit China from Canada, they contain many Chinese people who are doing business in China, but often they're also going back to their hometown. So there's both a personal side and a business side. So it's not just Chinese people who do business with China, but I think they are an important part of the equation, and I think they are very active in this area. And I think that whatever branch of the Chinese community Canadian Chinese come from, they are almost all enthusiastic about stronger ties between Canada and China. That is, by and large, a consensus in the Chinese Canadian community. So I think they agree with what we're doing in terms of stronger ties, and I think they are a big part of the solution in actually producing those stronger ties.
Thank you, Ambassador McKellen.
Pleasure.
Mr. Kimietz, please. Tom.
So thank you for being here today. I have a lot of questions based on the conversation around the table. So I'm going to kind of cover Hong Kong, the free trade agreement, religious rights in China, and the THAAD missile defense system deployed in South Korea today by the American government. And then if I have time, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership.
Okay.
So, all in 5 minutes.
But if you talk too long about what you're going to talk about, you won't have any time left to talk.
If I can get to the last one, I'll be happy. So on Hong Kong, on April 27th, 9 democracy activists were arrested ahead of the July visit by President Xi Jinping. And we know we've seen what's been going on with the clampdown on the city, the disrespect of the original agreement that had been reached when the colony was transferred back to China. I'd like to get your thoughts and your views on what's going on in Hong Kong as well. I've heard from a lot of expats who are in Beijing and Shanghai who travel to Hong Kong quite often. They're saying that the city's been downgraded to a Tier 2 city. And so essentially, the advertising that used to be in English in the city is now being converted. It's all in Chinese script. And the city is just not as important to the Chinese government anymore because it's become this Tier 2. But also this democracy movement, this vibrant democracy movement is being clamped down by the government in Beijing. So I'd like to get your views on Canada's view on it.
Well, as I said in my opening comments, we certainly have a keen interest in the integrity of Hong Kong's autonomous institutions under the one country, two systems formula. And I know there are some stresses and strains on that. We do what we can to support that. We have 300,000 Canadian citizens living in China, in Hong Kong. We have a very active consul general. We are very active in Hong Kong, and we certainly support that system. At the same time, you say Hong Kong might be a Tier 2 city. Well, I mentioned earlier a tier 2.5 city that was 10 million people. There's at least one tier 2 city, which has a population almost as big as Canada, 30 million. So a 2-tier city in China doesn't mean you're doing too bad. I think there might be 2 tier 1 cities according to some classifications, only Shanghai and Beijing. But look, Hong Kong is, what I'm trying to say is Hong Kong does face competition as to which will be the economic driver of China, and Hong Kong plays a major role. And I'm sure Hong Kong will continue to play a major role. So does Shanghai play a major role. But when you have a country of 1.3 billion people, there's room for more than one city to be a major role in the financing and the other activities of that country. And certainly for offshore activities and for in other areas, Hong Kong is thriving. Hong Kong does have its challenges. Canada does support the system that the Chinese agreed to, but there are strains on that, I know.
I'd like to move on to free trade, the potential for a free trade agreement with China. I know the Canadian government's interested in it. And you mentioned a labor chapter as part of a potential agreement. You mentioned that you have Australia envy, and I share your, I think Australia has done a great deal of innovative public policy changes that Canada tries to emulate oftentimes. Recently, they also scrapped their 457 visa, which allowed foreign workers to gain access and become to working in Australia and then becoming permanent residents and a path to citizenship. So they scrapped that. Part of their free trade agreement had provisions in it that allowed foreign workers to be sent to Australia to work there, and that caused a lot of tension with Australian workers because they weren't, people felt like they weren't getting the job opportunities they expected. What does Canada expect to see in a labor chapter?
Okay. I have some experience of issues of temporary foreign workers and immigration from my previous job, and no doubt that will be an issue in the free trade negotiations. I have not yet had discussions on that subject. But I remember from the old days, my old days, about the temporary foreign worker issue that exploded with public reaction some years ago. And I remember one of the issues was you had a mine in British Columbia where Mandarin was a required language, and if you didn't speak Mandarin, you need not apply for a job. And I remember that was a very explosive issue in Canada. And so I have that in my head. And so when we get on to these discussions with representatives of the Chinese government, I will be mindful of Canadian concerns, having lived through them myself. Well, we weren't the government then, but I was part of it. I remember it. So that is a sensitive issue. It's an issue which, no doubt, to some degree, will come up in potential free trade discussions if we go that route. And it's something one has to be aware of sensitivities in that area, but it hasn't yet come to pass.
Put it down there. Colleagues, it's the end of our 2 hours, plus you have 25 minutes to get to a vote. I think the ambassador understands that, having been here a few years. So first of all, on behalf of the committee, Ambassador, I want to say thank you very much for taking us up on our offer to invite you. It was very informative, and we'd like to do it on a regular basis. So keep that in mind, that when you are in Canada, we'd very much like to hear sort of an updates on where we're going, because many of us, of course, probably all of us in the room agree that China is a very important partner, and the relationship that's being developed is of great interest to all of us in many different areas. So we are also very interested as a committee in China vis-a-vis the strategy that the government will have dealing with Chinese politicians. And as you know, Canada has spent a great amount of time sending its political team to the U.S. We think very much around this table that that would be a good strategy for China. And so we are looking at that very thing ourselves as a committee, of coming to pay you a visit sometime in the not too distant future. So again, on behalf of the committee, we very much appreciate your time. And obviously, we wish you the best of luck because it's extremely important to Canada.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would certainly welcome a visit from all of you. So I hope you can come to Beijing. And as I said, it's my plan to return to Canada every 6 to 8 weeks. So I would be happy to provide reports from time to time if that is your desire.
Thank you, Ambassador. Colleagues, that'll be the end of today's meeting. Very impressive. You've got 25 minutes roughly to get to the vote. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.